Canadian Sea Turtle Network. I was here, as Soren had mentioned, coming to pick up some cold stunned sea turtles, which we'll talk about a little bit at the end, but I was coming here first. It just happened that the cold stuns, you know, showed up at the right time. So anyway, I did want to say I was coming. I really myself wanted to come to talk to you guys because the Blomidon field naturalists are so important to me personally. And certainly this area is super important to the sea turtle work that takes place in Canada. So I have been here before. I don't want to repeat too much stuff that people might have already heard. So I'm trying to find a balance between people who haven't heard anything about sea turtles in Canada and people who are like, I know this story so well. So I'm going to do my best in that respect. We turned 25 years old this year, the Canadian Sea Turtle Network, which is kind of amazing to me. I'm one of the founders of the organization, so that's weird. But it's given me a great opportunity to think about a lot of the ways in which groups like the Sea Turtle Network, like environmental groups, which I think are so critical to the world, particularly now, grow and the ways in which they're able to do that in a really healthy way. And so I'm thinking about that too while we're talking. I do want to just mention, of course, we're here in Mi'kma'ki, and I do want to mention that I try to be really mindful of the Indigenous peoples of Nova Scotia when we're doing our work. Traditionally, the Mi'kmaq people particularly didn't have a lot of interaction with sea turtles because the sea turtles that we find off the coast of Nova Scotia tend to be further offshore. They're not really coastal animals. They're much further offshore. But I do want to just talk about, when we talk about the cold stun turtles, I just want you to know that one of the things that I keep in mind when we're asking people to walk beaches looking for those turtles is that's the space that for sure the Indigenous people were so connected to. That's a space that's really an Indigenous space. And I wanted to just say that I try and really think about that when I'm there and how grateful I am to have the opportunity to work in this country and in this province and to be, you know, the beneficiary of an awful lot of suffering that took place at the hands of people from my culture, obviously, and that I'm really mindful of trying to do some reconciliation work in that respect. So I did want to mention that too. I'm going to talk just briefly about some of the history of sea turtles and talk a little bit about the biology of sea turtles because I think it's really fascinating. I'm going to start by talking about leatherback sea turtles. I do have some specimens for you to look at afterwards if you'd like to look at them. I'm going to ask you not to kind of pick them up because the skull in particular is getting really fragile. So you wouldn't want to be the one that broke Sherman Bleakney's skull. Sea turtle skull, leatherback skull, not Sherman Bleakney skull. Okay. But I do want to talk about leatherback. This is leatherback sea turtles. This is the sea turtle that we've done the most work studying. It is the largest sea turtle in the world. It's endangered in Canada, protected under the Species at Risk Act. It's in the Atlantic population, where the Northwest Atlantic population of leatherback turtles is in steep decline right now. It's declining at about a rate of 8% annually, which is really stressful, very stressful kind of compound interest, right? So we're working to do everything we can to try and keep them safe, certainly in Canadian context. They're really magnificent. And so I'll just talk a little bit about the biology here with you this evening. They're enormously big, and I'll show you some examples of that. You can see the skull over here just in terms of scale and size. But they're well known because they're, instead of having a typical hard shell like hard-shelled sea turtles or tortoises or things that you might see with a freshwater turtle, they do have what we would call a soft shell turtle. It doesn't mean that the shell is soft, but it does mean it doesn't have those scales, those scutes that we're used to seeing. Instead, its carapace is made up of a mosaic of teeny tiny bones all matched together, almost, you know, that give it this incredible flexibility. And they have these really easy to spot ridges that run the length of the carapace. So 7 long ridges run that length. And then it's covered, they're kind of embedded, the carapacial bone is embedded in fat and cartilage. And then it's covered in this inky blue skin that gives the turtle its name. It feels almost like rubber. I'm just going to show a little bit of this video, swimming at it. Yes, it worked. This is a leatherback swimming off northern Cape Breton Island. And I like this because it gives you a chance to see really how barrel shaped they are, how deep bodied they are, and how they swim. You can see there's some commensal fish with them. Those are pilot fish that are often with leatherbacks. We'll see them. This is a really neat video. You'll see in a second, you can see kind of how they breathe. You can see how quickly they turn in the water. And if you look carefully, you can see a jellyfish streaming from its mouth there. and pops its head up to breathe and then goes back down again. It's super duper fat, which I like. Nice, healthy, fat turtle. And you can see that kind of bird-like swimming, right, of them. They've been on the planet virtually unchanged for about 150 million years. And so they've been here when T-Rex roamed the earth, leatherback turtles were in the ocean. And that isn't probably a surprising fact to any of the people here, but I will say it's a surprising fact. Like, it's incredible, right? How adaptive they've been. Each leatherback has a pink spot on the top of its head. It's the lightest spot on that dark-bodied animal. Each one is unique. People will say it's like a fingerprint. You know, what's mostly interesting about it, aside from that they all differ from one another, is that it covers the pineal gland. And the pineal gland, as you may know in other animals, like sometimes some species of birds, is responsible for migration and kind of location for an animal. We don't have, there's a hypothesis that this may be the case with leatherbacks. It's the lightest spot on a dark-bodied animal. So the idea is maybe that the trajectory of sunlight or something goes through that specific part of the skull. It's the thinnest part of the skull as well and helps the turtle navigate. It's not really clear, but it's kind of an interesting physiological fact. Leatherbacks are very deep divers. They can dive deeper than 1 kilometer into the ocean. And they're quite remarkable because their carapace is made up of all these teeny tiny bones. And I thought I brought a piece with me and I didn't, I don't think. For you to see, I'm sorry, I don't have it. Someone else has taken it. Anyway, kids at Yarmouth Consolidated saw it today instead of you, I'm sorry. Anyway, but it gives it a flexibility, which actually is a really cool adaptation of the leatherback. So, you know, you typically couldn't dive that deep into the water. You'd have issues, right, because of the water pressure. But leatherbacks have this little bit of flexibility in their carapace as a result of the structure, the bone structure of it, that allows it to do these incredible dives. They can hold their breath for longer than an hour. And in both the case of the kilometer dive and the more than an hour holding breath, that's just animals that we've had trackers on, right, that we've had some kind of instrumentation on that will allow us to understand what was going on. So invariably, they could probably dive deeper and hold their breath longer than that. This is a really special slide to me. This is one of Sherman Bleakney's slides. And for those of you who didn't know Sherman, who was a big part of the Blomidon field naturalists, and at one point the head of the biology department at Acadia University, he was a really important person when it came to sea turtles in Canada, did some of the earliest work on sea turtles in our country. And he was a person who studied anatomy and this leatherback skull is a skull that he prepared in the 60s, but he did a lot of work, the very early work, studying the physiology of leatherback turtles. And this was one of the most important slides to him. And so I'm sharing it with you, and I always do with audiences, which compares the size of a human hand and arm to that of a leatherback flipper. But Sherman would tell you, and I think is really remarkable as well, is that actually the bone structure and what would be our wrists, but the wrist area of a leatherback and the fingers, the phalanges, mirror one another precisely. Bone for bone, your hand is structured and wrists are structured exactly the same way that a leatherback flipper is structured, which is just a remarkable kind of moment for evolution. Obviously, they don't have ball joints where their flippers are, the joints of their flippers are. But what it also allows that flipper to be is incredibly dexterous, right? It's an amazing thing to see a leatherback, because you imagine the flippers being kind of clumsy. If you think of yourself, you know, I don't know, myself snorkeling or something, you know, you have that sense of being like, but actually a leatherback will swim and it'll effectively turn what we would imagine to be its baby finger, and just the trajectory of its swimming changes. You know, like when you watch a female leatherback nesting at night, and she's, they all nest at night typically, but she's digging this nest out and they're so type A, like they're digging, and she like takes this little bit of sand off with the corner of one of her rear flippers, and you're like she's just going to cover it all in afterwards. But they're so committed to these beautiful, beautiful, perfectly sculpted nest chambers, but they can do it because there's so much movement in those flippers, which is really quite amazing. This is just to give you a sense of size. This is working on the back of one of our boats. This is Mike James, who is a founding member of the Sea Turtle Network and was the first person to start doing sea turtle studies at Acadia. And he's over 6 feet tall. So it just gives you a sense of the size of a leatherback turtle that we would see in our waters. Typically, they weigh about 1,000 pounds. They tend to be about 168 centimeters curved carapace length, so over the curve of their shell. But this just gives you an idea of how they can range in size. This is the largest leatherback turtle we've had on our boat. It was about 178 centimeters across the carapace, so well over 2 meters in total length. We didn't weigh that one. This is what it looks like when you try and catch a dinosaur in the ocean. We take a big butterfly net. So I always say we're like, we're getting our nets and we're going to catch a dinosaur. We work with commercial fishermen. That's been a really important part of the work that's been done with the Sea Turtle Network. I think it's really critical to look at conservation work as peace building work. And back in 1998, when we initially began working with the fishing community and trying to understand from kind of the traditional ecological knowledge standpoint, what did fishermen know about the ocean? Scientists believe that leatherbacks did not come to Canadian waters on purpose. They thought that any turtles that were here were errant animals. They were lost. They were extraliminal. I love that concept of an animal being lost, which, by the way, is a human construct. No animal is lost. We are lost. But anyway, and so we had this question about whether or not sea turtles were here and if they were at all, really. And because fishermen were seeing them and they were washing up dead on the beaches of particularly St. Margaret's Bay, kind of the more populated areas, and people were taking notice. And we began to try and figure out if that was the case. And that was the work that started actually at Acadia as part of Mike's master's degree. That's him on the pulpit there of the boat. And all the work, all the information that came, all the answers that came about whether or not sea turtles were here came from the fishing community. From the very first days of our work, we went around to every fishing community in Nova Scotia. We still do this today. Went onto the fishing wharfs, put up posters that said, have you seen this turtle? And asked fishermen to call us if they saw them, call us with a latitude and a longitude and a date and a time. And at the time, our big first donation of Fuji camera, you remember those old underwater, like ecologically horrible disposable single-use cameras. We got a donation of those. We gave those out to fishermen and asked them to take pictures if they saw leatherbacks. And suddenly all this information came in. And what we learned was fishermen, first of all, were excellent scientific partners. And second of all, were really, really interested in what was going on in the ocean, which at the time was a really unusual insight. There was this idea back in the day that, and I hope it's dissipating, but that fishermen, because they took things out of the ocean, couldn't possibly love it and couldn't possibly be interested in conserving it, when of course they're tremendously interested in conserving it, but they're also trying to run a business, right? So how do you kind of access that part of them that really cares that the ocean produces beautiful, amazing animals for them to show their kids or talk to their kids about, for their kids to see, right? Anyway, they became our research partners. So we work on commercial fishing boats, and we use what is a traditional Nova Scotia harpoon sword fisherman setup. The sea turtle work is based on that. And we catch the turtles in a net. We literally spend days on the water just looking. And that's one of the most important things, that kind of oddly profound things that a fisherman ever said to me, and it becomes relevant certainly in our beach patrol work. But I had said the first time I went out looking for a sea turtle with fishermen, we were trying to catch and satellite tag the very first sea turtle in the world ever satellite tagged was done as part of this work. And I said to the fisherman that was the captain of the boat, what are we looking for exactly? I mean, I had studied the leatherbacks. I knew, you do the school portion of it, right? But when you're moving into real life, it's like, really, what are we looking for? And he said to me, you're looking for something that's not supposed to be there. And at the time I was like, not helpful, Bert, but actually extremely insightful, right? If you're someone who knows your work, right, you understand. If you're a fisherman who's grown up on the ocean, who spends days and days and hours and hours and hours in that ocean, you understand what it's supposed to be. The landscape of your mind is in sync with what's out there. And so when something that's not supposed to be there is not supposed to be there, you know what it is instantly. Well, for me, I was like, anyway. But we still just look for turtles. We have sometimes aerial support from volunteer pilots, but for the most part, we're pretty old school about it, but have been pretty successful in terms of finding them. So when we first were able to say, because the fishermen had sent us sightings of leatherback turtles, hey, we've got sea turtles here, and there's lots of them, people were like, then they must be coming up the Gulf Stream. So the researchers are so interesting. I mean, it's such an interesting study in terms of like, how much we love a box that we can check and an idea about conservation. Like, we understand this about sea turtles. They are tropical animals, And so then we're like, no, we think they're in Canada. They're like, no. And then you're like, no, look there are all these sea turtles in Canada. Then they're like, then they must be following this Gulf Stream. And then we can, of course, do like a marine protected area idea. We could have this corridor for sea turtles and it will keep them. I don't know if anybody follows the right whale story, but I'm here to tell you, animals are just going to go where the food goes, right? They're not going to stick with like all the shipping lanes you've developed, but doesn't mean you don't try, but really. And so the whole hypothesis was, well, then they must be coming up the Gulf Stream. And so we wanted to satellite tag animals, catch them and have them tell us where they went. And this is what we found. Oops, sorry. which is not turtles following the Gulf Stream. Everywhere you see a red mark is where there's been a sea turtle. Okay, those are all leatherback, 160 satellite tag leatherback sea turtles. And they use virtually the entire Atlantic Ocean in terms of their travels. There's not a really consistent, track there. Which I always find interesting. We're like, please go to West Africa. Like, we're always like, oh, you've ever seen The Office where they're waiting, the episode of The Office where they're waiting to see if the sign will go into the corner. They're like watching the thing around. I think of that with like the turtles getting close to West Africa. I'm like, oh, you can do it. They never make it. Anyway, because there's a West African population of sea turtles that actually nest in the southern part of South America. Our turtles nest in the northern part of South America and the insular Caribbean. And they do these migrations in a single year, right? So they'll be in Trinidad at the end of May, and they'll be up in our waters by July, and they'll be up here. So we're seeing these massive single migrations of thousands of kilometers. It's also a really interesting thing to keep in mind when you're doing thinking about conservation or when you're teaching people about it or talking about it, because then we have, there's a global movement towards marine protected areas, which I think is a great idea, but it's not going to help leatherback sea turtles for conservation, right? So it's to remind us that you can have an idea, but that we have to have a complexity of ideas available to us in terms of protection or conservation, that it's never going to be just one size fits all, right? Just to keep that kind of thing in mind. People tend to also like to use leatherback turtles when they're talking about MPAs, and it's kind of not scientifically accurate. But anyway, we also do work in other places. So if you're trying to protect a Canadian species and it has an international kind of migration, you have to also look at what happens to it in other parts of its range. And so we do a lot of work in the nesting beach area. We do work in Trinidad. We've been working there for almost 23 years now. Because Trinidad is where we get most of the Canadian sea turtles. So we've got found sea turtles in Canadian sea turtles in about 15 different countries. And Trinidad has the largest proportion of turtles are coming from Trinidad, which is the last remaining largest stronghold of nesting leatherbacks in the Western Atlantic. So a really important population, important place for a crashing population. So what we do is we support the work of a group called the Nature Seekers there. They're our colleagues and dear friends at this point. And we support their science and helping develop their scientific programs and helping train people down there so that they can run their own science as well. At their invitation, we're there. This is training our colleague Kyle in how to satellite tag turtles, because what we wanted to do was find out what the Canadian turtle, so when they find a turtle that's a Canadian turtle, we wanted to see what the Canadian turtles did leaving the nesting beach. And I just want to show you this very cool, one of my very favorite things we've ever found. We tagged these 3 turtles. We'd named the turtles Suzanne, Christy, and Sharon in Trinidad during the nesting season, and then watched them come back up north to Nova Scotian waters. And then the thing about leatherbacks is they don't nest every year. They nest once every 2 to 3 years, basically. I mean, then there's always the outlier that's like, I'm doing it every 4 years. So, or someone that's like, I'm going to go every year. Like they just, can't really speak in absolutes with animals as much as we'd like to. Anyway, if you look at Suzanne, this is very cool because we put a tag on her in 2015 in Trinidad and watched her come up to Nova Scotia and feed. And then she came back. And we took the tag off in 2017. She came back again. They tend to come back to the same place to nest a second time, right? Or they tend to show fidelity to a nesting region. Leatherbacks are regions. Smaller hard-shelled sea turtles can almost go within a kilometer of where they hatched, right? There's a natal homing instinct that takes place there. So because she comes back again to mature beach, we're able to then take her transmitter off and put a new one on and start to get some of the only data that exists in the world of learning about a single animal, the life work of a single animal. But if you look at these tracks, the most miraculous thing to me is that, which is she takes almost exactly the same route up. And when you think of that other map I showed you, and you think of the breadth of the ocean, you think of like, there's not like Route 80 or something in the ocean, that she takes almost the same way up is really remarkable. And one of the things that this is kind of new information. And one of the things that we're starting to see too is with some of the neophyte nesters, or what we assume are neophyte nesters, because they're smaller turtles in size, we see them kind of bopping around a little bit more, like not kind of sure of where they're going, it feels like. Whereas these kind of older turtles are like, we're just taking this way. But I think that's one of my favorite things that we've run into. This is the reason the sea turtles are here, and this was posited by Sherman Bleakney years and years and years ago, was to feed on our jellyfish. These great big, either the little moon jellies that we see early in the season, those really Aurelia rita, those clear, almost looking jellyfish, and then the really giant lion's mane jellyfish that grow to be the size of a trash can lid up in northern Cape Breton. I always get calls in the fall from Cape Breton from tourists who are like, I saw a turtle with a rope in its mouth. It's bleeding. It's bleeding really badly. And I'm like, oh, I'm pretty sure it's a jellyfish. We're good. Anyway, but you can see, right? Like you'd be like, oh my God, blood. So they're feeding on jellyfish. This is up in northern Cape Breton. And one of the coolest adaptations that I think that that exists in sea turtles is how they feed. So leatherbacks don't, like all sea turtles and all turtles, don't have teeth. Instead, they have their throats and their esophaguses are lined with, and I've got a piece of it here for you to see, spines, esophageal spines that point downward. And they're the most remarkable part of this very cool animal, or one of the most remarkable things. There's a million cool things about them. Anyway, and what it does is the spines face downwards and they shred the jellyfish on their way down. And you can also kind of picture in your mind when you think about ocean plastic, how easy it is for something to get, pieces of plastic to get wedged in there, and how then they can attract other pieces of plastic and things don't break down. But they're so sharp that you have to wear dish gloves when you're dealing with them. You can't wear surgical gloves because it cuts right through them. But that's what it looks like during necropsy at the Atlantic Veterinary College. And you can just see how it lines that whole esophagus and how like cool that is. But this was some of the work that was done, again, with the help of fishermen, which is, this is a leatherback, it's one of my favorite videos, a leatherback feeding on jellyfish. And I hope that it works. Oh, 1 second. It's not connected somehow. This must have happened when we, 1 sec. I've broken it. Just imagine, if you will. Oh, it's working well. I'm so happy for you. Just a second. Here, look. I can do it too. It's because we had to switch it. But look at here. Oh no, wrong one. No, I already seen this one. Not as cool. No. Oh, it wasn't compatible with the QuickTime player. Oh, it's working on there. Can you? Okay. It's a really neat video. So happy for the people online. That's right. That was a little active. We did that for them. Sorry. All the rest of you bothered to show up. You know, we're just kidding. I'm really sorry. I don't know what's happened with that. Oh gosh. Well, oh no. It eats the jellyfish. And you get to watch it. I'm sorry. We can maybe pull it up later and we can just have it playing. But the cool thing is how many jellyfish they eat. What we were able to discover from this video that you could have looked at, we were able to count the number of jellyfish a leatherback turtle eats. And we were able to get an estimate of the size and the weight and the caloric value and all the rest of it. And what we were able to ascertain is that leatherbacks eat about their body weight in jellyfish a day here off our coast. So each leatherback is vacuuming out about 1,000 pounds of jellyfish a day from our ecosystem. And what's so interesting is that when you're on a field vessel and there are leatherbacks around, you may see them eating jellyfish, but you don't see jellyfish at the surface. And what's incredible in that video is that it's almost like a conveyor belt of jellyfish further down. So, and the video that you didn't see is I talk to you about it's in the photic zone still, right? That top part of the water column where those sunlight still reaches. But then also we get the black and white kind of video that goes on even deeper and you can see them it's jellyfish rich down there. And so they're eating, like they just eat and eat and eat and eat and eat, like a little Pac-Man game. And what's interesting, there are a couple of interesting things about that. I mean, in and of itself, it's incredible. But the thing to think about is what happens in a jellyfish heavy ecosystem. So if we were to pull the leatherbacks out of that ecosystem and have a jellyfish heavy ecosystem, jellyfish heavy ecosystems are incredibly unhealthy ecosystems, right? Because jellyfish feed on larval fish. They basically clear out a lot of the populations of fish and crustaceans and other things. So it's really critical to have that part of the ecosystem. You know, as with ecosystem generally, let's not pull things out of it. Anyway, but this is kind of an interesting way of illustrating it. This is a leatherback turtle on the beach in French Guiana. And if you take a good look at her, you can see how cool, like those ridges that I was talking about are really pronounced on her shell. And this is the exact same turtle. So this would be in March. This is the exact same turtle on our field boat at the end of July. It looks like, do you remember those like Bugs Bunny where they like pump up things and they get really big. Or like a Thanksgiving, like just for the US Thanksgiving, the Macy's parade people, like this is just looks like we pumped it up. They get incredibly fat. They get fat, so fat they can hardly move. Like they'll have a skull that doesn't, you can't have fat within the structure of the skull, and then their necks will just be like giant cowl necks full of fat. So they get 33% heavier here by the end than they are in the nesting beach. And they get about 5 months worth of their entire caloric needs up here. So the waters off of Nova Scotia, Atlantic Canada are critical. They're the most important feeding grounds for leatherbacks in the Western Atlantic in the world. And this is just to let you see all the different countries where our leatherbacks go to nest, right? So the Nova Scotian leatherbacks are also Surinamese, Guianese, Trinidadian, all these other countries. And so the international work that takes place in terms of trying to work with other countries and make sure that we're organized to support our colleagues down there if they need support, or for, you know, to all work together to try and keep sea turtles as understood to be an important part of that kind of international ecosystem. So just a couple of more things because I'm finishing up here. I did want to just talk a little bit about the field naturalists and the sea turtle network. And I did want to mention just the importance of the people who have been a part of this organization over time and how they've impacted the work that we've done. These are examples of the very first poster we ever put up around the fishing wharves, and then the posters that we use still today. And that was part of Mike James's master's thesis, but also it was stolen from Tom Herman. That's a picture of Tom and his wife, Kathy, who used to be the head of the biology department as well at Acadia and a VP academic and all the things, but he was Mike's master's supervisor. This is him at my wedding. Oh, is he? Oh, Tom, hey. Anyway, he knows how important I hope that he is, but the fact is that was his idea, right? And he was a guy who was willing to be a person who studied landing sea turtles, which is why Mike had come to his lab in the first place, and then completely allow a totally different type of project, right? He had that kind of elasticity of intellect that I think so often scientists lack, or academics lack in a way. You know, we get so used to, all of us, right? We can become rigid and used to one particular way of thinking and then want to stay safe in that space. And I think if we're going to have a really good and successful kind of endeavor to protect the earth, we all have to be able to have that type of flexibility, right? And I think he really exemplified that and really supported a whole kind of wildly different project than he was expecting, you know? And so I'm grateful to him for that. And then we were all kind of standing on the back of the brains of Sherman Bleakney in a lot of ways when it comes to sea turtle science. He was the first person that worked with fishermen in the fishing community. And when the sea turtles started washing up, Sherman was interested in talking to the fishermen and asking them if they would let him look at the turtles. And remarkably, he would bring them, he would get the turtles from the fishermen. And I'm going to just tell you, I have sea turtles in my back. I had them in my trunk just from Harborville to here. And I was like, holy God, they smell. Like, this is a man that put them in the back of his family Volvo, right? He is so committed to sea turtles and his family. Like, everybody would have smelled that for a very long time on a hot day before air conditioning, just FYI, right? No one was like, you know, anyway. But he would bring them up to the mountain behind Wolfville, and they would do these necropsies and have things like this skull that came out of them, right? And he has these beautiful specimens that exist at Acadia in the biology department that were all of his creation in terms of taking the time to take care of those things and to just be curious. And one of my favorite things, he did a couple of things that I love so much, but one of them was someday, because they would leave the carcasses out in his friend's farm afterwards, and they would bury them or do whatever with them, what they weren't using. And he said, someday, Kathleen, people are going to find these carcasses years and years from now and say, sea level used to be way. Anyway, the other thing he said to me at one point was, Kathleen, you think it's hard to raise money for the sea turtle. Imagine me raising money for the sea slug. Because although he had been the person who described, he has this amazing article in the early 60s, who had described very clearly why he thought leatherbacks were in Canadian waters. He thought they were here on purpose. He thought they were here eating jellyfish. He'd done all kinds of work. He'd taken out their stomachs. He'd found twigs from mangrove forests in the Caribbean. He knew they weren't digested. He connected all the dots. He laid out exactly what was going on with sea turtles in Canada. And then places like the NRC refused to fund him. People didn't have that elasticity of mind, that curiosity to suggest that maybe they didn't know all the things, right? And so he had to set the Sea Turtle Research Society, went off and became an expert in sea slugs and all kinds of things, like, you know, all dikelands, all the things. But anyway, the point being that he still was interested in sea turtles and kind of kept up an amazing kind of record of what went on. But he really was so influential to the work that was done. This is him with Mike, right at the beginning of Mike's work. And this is one of my favorite pictures. This is Sherman in his late 80s. We finally got him to come on the sea turtle field boat because he'd never seen, he discovered all these things about sea turtles and he'd never seen one in the wild. And so, of course, we went out to see. He sported his Sea Slug of Atlantic Canada sweatshirt, and which I just loved so much. Anyway, they're like sea slugs on the back as well. Anyway, and came out on the boat, and of course we'd seen leatherbacks the day before, and we get there and there's just like, it's like an empty ocean, and I was like, no, because he wasn't feeling well on the boat and all the things. Anyway, and one of the greatest moments of my life was to see him see a leatherback turtle at the surface of the water and to watch him just call out the different muscle groups that the turtle was using. It's like, oh, there it is there. And just, you know, it was amazing, really amazing day. The other person I'm just going to mention briefly is Jim Wolford, who was a big person with the Blomidon Field Naturalists. And I was desperately searching for a picture of Jim, which I know I have on my phone, and I couldn't find it. So I thought instead what I'd do is just take a small selection of the emails that I have from Jim Wolford, which is writing to the Blomidon Field Naturalists and to me every sea turtle article he ever found in his life. And I just want to mention that this organization has been so kind to us in the sea turtle work over time and so generous with, and he's such a lovely example of it, right? Because he just cataloged everything, right? He'd be like, it would be an article about the work that we'd done. So obviously I knew about the work, but he was like, I see you, I see what you're doing, and I think it matters. And I'm going to, Tom again, I mean, he was copied on all the emails I noticed when I was looking through them. I was like, he copied. Anyway, but he really was, he had that real understanding of a naturalist community. And I think the field naturalists, I mean, even just seeing all of you here tonight, as being a group that has to support each other and also to be always fascinated, right? Always curious, always interested in paying attention to what was going on. And then not afraid to then routinely say, I saw that bird again. I saw that bird again, you know? And I thought he was just a beautiful example of that. There's a lot that goes on in this area for sea turtles, and probably what you know, the Bay of Fundy is a really interesting place, and this is one of the most interesting things that has happened to me in my career as a sea turtle biologist, sea turtle person. The tides at one, we've had two instances where we've had leatherback sea turtles down the Shubenacadie River, way down the Shubenacadie River, and this one was. Usually they're moribund. The first one was moribund, but they're pulled in by the tides, right? Which is quite incredible, and pushed all the way down that river. So then we got a call at one point about a turtle. This was the year before last. And it was in the Shuby River, and we couldn't find, we went out looking for it. This is us trying to navigate this just incredible bottom of that tidal bore area. It's just amazing to me. Anyway, to look for this turtle, which we eventually did find, and with the help of, firemen and DNR and all kinds of people, it became the world's first turtle to ever go on a helicopter ride, which for the record was one of the most stressful 45 seconds in my entire life, because I thought, oh God, something happens and this turtle dies in a helicopter. What am I going to do? You know, because I was ultimately responsible. Anyway, it was fine. And we ended up being able to put a satellite tag on that turtle, which was interesting, and to follow it for a little bit. Although we did lose track of the tag, but, and the firemen that helped the most were from Stewiacke, so we called her Stewie, but it's just one of kind of the odd things that happen in the area here. But one of the things that's most interesting, and that I'm really hoping to interest all of you in, is looking at what happens with the hard-shelled sea turtles that we find cold stunned at this time of year, obviously along the coasts of Nova Scotia, but we think very largely in the Bay of Fundy area. I just picked up 4. We had 5 this weekend that stranded, and they invariably, for the most part, they strand dead. This is some sad pictures for all of you, but also happy pictures. What happens is they're little tiny, these are the hard-shelled sea turtles. These are green sea turtles, loggerhead sea turtles, and Kemp's Ridley sea turtles. And what we get in the Bay of Fundy, it seems to be, and also, as I said, in other parts of Nova Scotia, but really largely, and we think potentially most importantly in the Bay of Fundy area, are these little, they're about ruler sized, I say. They're like 30 centimeters in carapace length, these little tiny turtles. And they become caught in kind of warm, like they'll be in warm water that breaks up for some reason, right? So the ocean, and as you all I'm sure know, is not kind of consistently temperatured, right? There's not a consistent temperature all around, and there'll be warm water rings and cores and things. And so a turtle can come in warm water, and then the water can get broken up by wind, or tidal action or what have you. And then the turtle finds itself suddenly in water that's too cold for it. And these little guys are tiny. They don't have a lot of fat stores. They become hypothermic pretty quickly. They aren't able to continue to swim. And then we find them washed up on the shores of beaches. This happens in really big numbers in Massachusetts and New England at this time of year as well. They'll get hundreds of turtles a week washed up on their beaches. We're starting to see it, I think, more this year, certainly, than we have in a long time, but also generally more. As you probably know, the Gulf of Maine is one of the fastest warming pieces of ocean in the Atlantic, certainly. And we expect that these animals will start to kind of push their range further and further north. So I anticipate more of this kind of thing happening. And so what we have at the Sea Turtle Network is a beach patrol program where we ask people to walk an area of beach once a week, basically, just to have a look out for these animals. We've had 6 this week. And the last 7 days have been quite crazy, including just one this afternoon, which I actually brought for you to see. If you'd like to have a look at it, I'll bring it in. It's in the cold because, again, it was all starting to smell really bad. But a beautiful Kemp's Ridley. I'll bring her in. She's clearly very freshly dead, and she'll just break your heart. But I'd love for people just to keep an eye out. And well, you can see what you're looking for, and you'll actually get to see it in person. This is a pretty heartbreaking photo because you can see the turtle trying to worm itself up. Do you see how it pulls its flippers in? This was in St. John, New Brunswick, and they couldn't be sweeter. But what we had this week was actually remarkably an alive green turtle that was found in Scott's Bay, which has been called Scotty. It's a juvenile, so we can't tell at this point. Sexual dimorphism isn't clear. I'm calling it a she just because it looks like a girl to me. Anyway, it's not, it could be a boy too. Anyway, but she was alive, which is amazing. Typically, in 25 years of doing this work, we've only had 2 turtles that have survived longer than 24 hours, and she's the second one. And so we got her on Thursday. She's currently in veterinary care, and I'll show you a little, well, I'd like to show you a video. God knows if it'll work. Yes. Well, this one works. This is Chris Harvey Clark, who's a vet that we've worked with since the very beginning as well. And this is Scotty at his house. He's the vet in her care. He's talking about how her breath smells sweet. And if she had, she'd smell very bad if she had pneumonia. So this is one of the things where he was saying she wasn't super sick. This is just the first day we got her. And then this is her 2 days later. You can see how much better she's looking even there. Anyway, her CCL was just over 32 centimeters. So she's, again, not super big, but she's bigger than, for example, the one I'll show you when I bring it in from outside. So we think that maybe because she was slightly bigger, she had a better chance of survival. So right now we've been engaged, as I was actually just when your meeting started, I had to run out and take a call. In trying to get her shipped to warmer water. So if we were to put her back in the water here, she would die because all of our water is less than 10 degrees Celsius. But we can't just drive her to Boston because she's an endangered species. So she's protected under CITES, which is the Committee on International Trade in Endangered Species, which means that you have to have permits in order to move her across international boundaries. And the US, that permitting process takes 180 days. And so Canadians were able to rush a permit, which I'm waiting to arrive by Purolator tomorrow by 9. Hopefully everybody, anyway. And then she's going to go to Bermuda because that is a Commonwealth country, and we're able to actually have a scientific exchange with them. They were able to get a permit pulled together, which we just got from them today. You can imagine the import has to match the export, has to match, all the things. Now we just found out about an hour ago when the meeting started that we now need to have another inspection when we get to Toronto. Anyway, it's been a bureaucratic adventure. But she's heading to Bermuda tomorrow, hopefully tomorrow afternoon, which will be really thrilling. And thank you, Air Canada, just by the way. And this will be her. This is the first one we ever sent out. Back in the day, 20 years ago, it was a little bit easier than it is today. But anyway, there were fewer things. I did bring a few things for you to look at, and I'll show those to you, including a really beautifully made leatherback replica. This was taken from a turtle that was entangled in, there's a whole body that goes with it. I just brought the head today, but it's taken from a turtle that was entangled and died in Cape Breton, northern Cape Breton. And the artist, Doug Morse, is here. He's from Port Williams. I don't know if anybody knows him. He's genius. There he is with the whole turtle. And really, he's just incredible. And the amount of kind of talent and contribution that continues to come to the work that we do from this area is quite amazing. It's really this is his studio. He's just fantastic and was a student of Sherman Bleakney's. The last thing I'll say, I will mention to you, we do an eco tour to Trinidad every year. And if anybody's interested in hearing more about it, we do go down to help with the leatherback sea turtle research there. One of the best ways, and it's internationally, that we protect sea turtles is through ecotourism, because then the turtles in places where they nest become more economically valuable alive than they are dead. And so it's one of the ways that internationally we keep sea turtles alive. This is a beach in Trinidad where we work. People do satellite tagging with us, see the really cute little baby turtles, and really get a chance to work with all of our colleagues down there. If you're interested in hearing more about that, please let me know. You can put your name on a list and I'll send you some information, but I did want to make sure you knew about it. And same with Beach Patrol. If you'd like to be part of the Beach Patrol, please let me know. I'm really happy to sign you up for that, or I can give you information about how to do that, or simply walk the beach. That's also fine. We'll take anything. But again, I think there's real value, and I think this audience knows this better than most, but I think there's real value in knowing part of the beach really well, right? So if there's something that's not supposed to be there, you're going to know it. And we have one of our youngest beach patrollers here with us. I don't want to embarrass you, but I'm really happy that she came, Callie. So, and she's out there every week looking for sea turtles. So I'm happy to answer questions. And I'm also, I'm going to bring the sea turtle in and we can look at her too.
Thanks very much, Kathleen. Are there any questions? I think instead of me passing this around, we'll just repeat the question so that the people on Zoom can hear it. So any questions? Guy has a question here.
So the question for people online is, what's causing the decline, the kind of drastic decline of leatherbacks at this point? That is a great question. We know a little bit about it. I mean, it's like anything with endangered species, there's a combination of factors at play, right? So one of the major causes we think in the Northwest Atlantic is a traditional artisanal gill net fishery that takes place off the nesting beach areas, particularly in Trinidad, and then also was along the Suriname and the Guyanas. There's an issue there. I was talking to fishermen down there about that fishery when I was when I go every year for the eco tour. And so keep in mind, they know who I am and what I'm there for. So they're talking to someone who they know cares about sea turtles. I'm conspicuous in terms of I look like nobody else that's around. And I said, so how many are you catching a night? We were just chatting and I was talking about here and showing them maps of the sea turtles and stuff. And I said, how many would you catch a night? And he said, oh, about 12. And so he's catching 12 turtles, either nesting females or males that are of mating age. And that's the number he was willing to tell me that he thought would be palatable to me, you know? So I'm guessing there's probably even more than that. Now, not all of those will die, but large numbers of them are impacted quite significantly. So there's a take of nesting females that occurs in the nesting regions. There's still poaching that occurs. That was one of the things people kept saying, oh, so great that with COVID, no one's on the beaches. I was like, no one's on the beaches who's like really law abiding, you know, but people were still, I mean, leatherbacks were poached for dog food. So there's an issue in that respect. There's also, you know, the climate change is an issue for turtles. There's increased storms, which impacts beach erosion, which impacts nesting. There's also rising temperatures, which impacts the leatherbacks, leatherbacks and other sea turtles, sorry, obviously, have temperature dependent sex determination. So there's some places in, for example, Australia, where the nests are almost entirely female. We're seeing a gross feminization of the sex ratios. So that we don't see as a huge issue right now, but it's a concern. concern, right? And then also what we find is when nests are mostly female, for example, then they just don't tend to do as well. Like for some reason, though, if they're finding, there's some research out that shows that they just don't, they're not as successful in terms of hatching. So there's a whole pile of things at play. There's still, as I said, poaching as well of just the eggs. There's still a trade in sea turtle eggs on the black market that occurs. So it's kind of a huge kind of pressure from a bunch of different places. But I think the fishery is probably the primary cause at this point, but it's so hard to disentangle some of this stuff. When we're looking at loggerheads, for example, this is a population whose largest most of the nesting occurs in Florida. So when you think about Florida, you've got a kind of a very well developed government that is able to implement extremely, complicated conservation programs. There's a lot of money being thrown at sea turtles in Florida. You've got this population that's going up and down, up and down, up and down with loggerheads and not increasing, right? We're not seeing a trend upward with all this conservation effort put at these nesting turtles, right? This is a place where they do control over lighting. They have all kinds of protections and all kinds of government people trying to help, and agencies and, dozens and dozens of sea turtle biologists in that state. And we can't figure out why they're not getting better, And so it's really complicated. It's hard to understand a lot of it. It's a long answer. I'm sorry. Yes. Yes. Yeah. So the question is, do leatherbacks have issues with ship strikes? That is a good question. Not so much here. So, and there's always an issue. I mean, I've heard of a couple of ship strikes in 25 years. There's always the issue. We see sea turtles occasionally with damage from propellers, clearly propeller damage, but it's not clear whether the turtle was damaged after it died, or if it was floating and got hit, or whether it was actually hit by the ship. Ships, an issue, when there's increased ship traffic, there might be an issue with that in other parts of the world. When I'm talking about leatherbacks, certainly other turtles are impacted, but it's not quite to the same degree as you'd find with whales. Leatherbacks are, for example, and certainly some of the other sea turtle species as well, from what we see on the boat, will die. You know what I mean? They're kind of aware. They're very aware of their surroundings. So we don't see that. I mean, I don't see that kind of as an issue. We've never had a problem with like bumping into something. It's always gotten out of the way beforehand. So, but we haven't seen in dead turtles any kind of evidence of that being a real issue here. Certainly not to the same degree we see with whales. Yes.
We have a question from Zoom. Do leatherbacks ever relate or play with researchers as dolphins are reputed to do?
So do leatherbacks play like dolphins, for example? We don't see that behavior, no. We don't see, it's a really interesting question. I mean, I'm super fascinated by this question, is what's the social structure of leatherbacks, right? So we would suggest typically with reptiles, there isn't a social structure, right? We don't see care of young. We don't see any of that kind of stuff going on to the same way we'd expect that from a mammal, for example. But when we see one leatherback, often we'll see others, right? So there's some kind of communication going on, I would assume, but we haven't figured that out yet. But yeah, certainly not with, I wish they played with researchers. I mean, I've been trying this, like we have this turtle, Scotty, right? This turtle, and you're taking this turtle out of its environment. You're rehabbing the turtle. You're caring for the turtle until we get it on this plane. And the whole time you're like, I wish you could understand me. Everything's okay. Like, you know what I mean? You're trying to, can't communicate with that animal. But what was interesting with leatherbacks, I will say, and fishermen have said this before, that when they're really stressed out, when they're entangled, you can actually put your hand on their head and they'll settle down. That's what I've been told before. So I don't know, Any other questions? Oh, yes. You would call our toll-free phone number. Yeah, which is online. You can look us up online, like it's on our website, and I can, it's part of the Beach Patrol package too. Yeah, we have a toll-free phone number. It rings to my cell phone, which I have with me now. I could hold up to show you. We could do an example. We're there to answer it. So when Scotty was called in, we found out about her or having stranded. I mean, we had that turtle back in veterinary care within 6 hours. So there's an instant response time. If we can make it happen, we will. Yeah. Yes. She was found in Scotts Bay. Yeah, she was found in Scotts Bay. And it was amazing because the couple who found her had found a carapace from a turtle, just had and 2 instances dealt with turtles that had died, like hard-shelled sea turtles that had become hypothermic. One of them was just a carapace left, and the other one had died, and so they were kind of familiar with what to do. And so it's a couple, and the woman had taken the turtle and carried it over 1 kilometer down the beach. When she first saw it, she's like, "Oh my God, we got to get this away from the water." And she picked it up and carried it just a huge distance, right, to get it to safety. So I have so much time for them, I got to tell you. Just amazing. And everybody, right? I mean, it's, yeah. Every part of Nova Scotia we cover, because right now we're still trying to find information. So we're getting a lot of action on this part of, on the kind of this part of the Bay of Fundy, right down into kind of the Morden area. But we have had sea turtles wash up in Cape Breton. We've had them wash up on the South Shore. We've had them, these hard-shelled sea turtles. We're still trying to get baseline information. And that's really an important thing. We're learning along with everybody else, right? Exactly what's going on. That was the question, was what parts of the beach do we cover? So we actually ask volunteers to tell us where will they walk, so that we can make sure that they walk, someplace where it's going to be easy for them, so that they'll actually do it. And try and cover as much of the province as we can, just so we can learn where we should be spending our time. Like, it's all new, right? And we're learning, in Cape Cod, they'll tell you, or in New England, they'll tell you, you only walk at the high tide mark because that's where they're going to be. And so we used to have people walking wherever they wanted to on the beach. And now we're like, everybody's walking on the high tide mark. We're trying to kind of narrow down exactly what the best process should be for us to find them most successfully. But right now we just need people to look, so we can all learn that together. And I think it's really exciting to be part of the new, I mean, when we look at sea turtle research, even Sherman, he was doing his work in the 60s. It's so new, this science, right? Like, this isn't, something that's, like, I always think of like the beaver, or like, and the white-tailed deer. I don't know, things that people know an awful lot about, right? I mean, when you're involved in sea turtle research in Canada, you're figuring out the baseline data, because even after 25 years, the generation time on these animals, when they become sexually mature, right, there's a question about what time. We don't know exactly with leatherbacks, for example, but it's well into their 20s at a minimum, right? And so we're not even seeing the first generation of this, like, we're, of the animals. We don't know their lifespan of a leatherback. We couldn't tell you how long they lived. So even just trying to get information on what we're seeing now, I mean, it's incredible to be part of that. And so I hope that you will all help. No, we keep track. Yeah, the question is, where would we assign an area to walk? No, we would ask you where you will walk, and then we'll keep track of where you are. So we've got a map for ourselves of all the areas to make sure that, we know exactly where people are, but actually walking where you are willing to walk is good enough, So the worst thing would be if we're like, please walk this beach, and then people, it's just too far away, right? Whereas if it's a place that you are planning to walk and planning to know well, then we know you'll do it, and that's way more valuable to us. So yeah, thank you. Anything else? Thank you so much.
Yeah, if there are no more questions, please help me in thanking Kathleen for an amazing talk. Thanks. Good. And yeah, oh yes, yeah, bring your turtle in. And yeah. And if anybody would like a calendar, to buy a calendar, I did bring a few of them in. It's only cash basis, but they're also available at all the farmers markets in this area. Before you leave, if you wouldn't mind just stacking the chairs, usually about 10 per stack is good. Yeah, so here comes the turtle. If you would like to see it. Anyways, thank you so much. Just a reminder, the December meeting is going to be the second Tuesday of December, not the third. December 12th. Thanks. it on. The other thing, I will send the information about the beach walk out again so that everybody can get it one more time.